test your browser. So coveryourtracks.eff.org, and then click on the button to test your browser. And if anyone from the EFF is here, like, major kudos for this project. This is a project that more people need to know about and use. We have some very trusting people here scanning my QR code. While you're doing that, I actually own the website qrcodesecurity.com, where if you click it, it pops up and says, never scan someone else's QR code, I could hack you, blah, blah, blah. And I have stickers all over. I have teenage daughters who scan anything, so I made up stickers that when they scanned it, it popped up and said, I could have hacked you, never scan a QR code. And I'm not the cool dad. So if you've done that, you're gonna get something like this. So it takes about 60 seconds, but there'll be 3 categories it rates your browser on. Does it block ads? Does it block invisible trackers, like we talked about, the pixels and iframes? And then protecting you from you have a unique fingerprint. If you have a unique fingerprint, I can track you regardless of your cookie setting, privacy setting, whatever, because it's your fingerprint. Are people generally got there yet? Yep, we'll talk about that. Thank you. So what she said is that the first 2 were good, and the last one was bad. And there's good news and bad news here. The good news is browsers are getting better and better. When I first started doing this talk, this was my shock and awe, where everything would be bad, and I wouldn't have to convince you there was a problem because this would be a really bad thing. The good news is browsers are getting better, but not perfect. So every few months I do this, and you can have my slides when I'm done. But if you look at this, really there's no perfect solution. Brave on Windows is the only one that has a unique fingerprint. The problem with that unique fingerprint is it often breaks sites. You know, there's a myth that sites are blocking Brave, and that's not true at all. The problem is those sites are trying to use your unique fingerprint for session management. You know, dumb, dumb, dumb. But if you're using a fingerprint for session management and Brave randomly changes your fingerprint at every request, it's going to break. Couple things here. You know, protected browsing in some cases really helps. On Windows with Chrome and Firefox, that protected browsing, some call it incognito mode, some call it stuff, does help a lot. Mac, there's really no great browser here. What I use personally at home, if you use Firefox with EFS privacy plugin, privacy browser plugin, and you use a VPN and switch it a lot, that's about as good as it gets. I've got a whole section here on how to protect yourself. And this is just some improvements. If the new iOS now actually starts blocking things. They block some of the big ones like the Googles and the Facebooks. And this is just since I started. I'm very proud of this. Since I started doing my research now, sites that host protected health information (PHI), if you host PHI and are using certain tracking tools, it's considered a breach, which is a phenomenal progress. This is just technology. But I cleared my browser, and there's really four things we're talking about here: cookies, iframes, browser fingerprinting, and remote image requests. And then I threw in super cookies here. It's funny. Most of us are in Phoenix. When I speak in Phoenix, I tend to have a very, very strong technology audience. People in Phoenix tend to have a lot more technology background, but a lot of security people don't understand cookies. And if you run a burp scan or a Coverity scan, whatever, when you find cookies, you'll get a lot of information on low severity findings. And what's interesting is, in order for tracking to work, you actually have to weaken the DOM in cookies. But this is an example of a healthy cookie. It's a PHP session management cookie. I changed the name and changed the value so you can't hijack my session. But a cookie has 4 attributes. There's a lifespan, and a healthy cookie should eventually expire, either when you log out, close your browser, or at a certain predetermined time. There's encryption. That cookie should be encrypted for obvious reasons. And then protection. No one should be able to read that cookie except for your browser and the site that trusts it. And lastly, there's scope. Even if it's the site, what subdomains and parts of that site should see it. So a healthy cookie is protected in those 4 ways. Now, if you were to do a web vulnerability scan that had a Facebook cookie, you'd actually have 4 findings. You know, when you look at pretty much all tracking cookies, you know, host only, meaning only your domain can see it. It needs to be, a healthy cookie needs to be encrypted, and tracking cookies tend not to be. HTTP only means only your browser can see it. So a lot of times, if you code, those of you who code in JavaScript, you can read a cookie in JavaScript. Someone else's JavaScript should not be able to read someone else's cookie in a healthy world. And then same site restrictions, meaning only that site should see it. And this isn't just Facebook. So in order for tracking to work, they actually have to intentionally weaken the cookies. And this is just real simple. Your site, you know, your trusted site sets a cookie. Untrusted site can read it using JavaScript or other technologies, goes to a data broker. That data broker sends your trusted site back information about you. And in the old days, fingerprinting really was kind of your host name and then some HTTP environmental variables that we don't even really use anymore, but your user agent that tells about your browser, what you accept, your IP address. And this is my fingerprint. You know, I live near Elk Grove. That's true. I was on Windows 11. And this is environmental. You can't stop this. This is part of the HTTP header, and that's okay. But I found 187 different ways that they're fingerprinting you. And why do you care? So there's my fingerprint, which, you know, it is what it is. But on the right is a site that I go, that I trust the site, I give it my information, my address and all this. And at this point, the will join my fingerprint. And from that point on, for the rest of that browser's useful life, that fingerprint is now connected to the information I put into that form. And that's how I'm being tracked. And this slide got all funky. But and these are some of the ways, and these are a lot of different ways that we're being tracked. And I put a few in red because they cracked me up. Do not track header enabled. Do not track. Your decision not to be tracked is actually a tracking attribute. Your choice to block ads is actually a way that the ads are tracking you. So it's crazy. There are other things that are tracking you. Your browser resolution. And for each one of these, I wrote some real simple JavaScript to show you how simple it is. You know, how big your browser is and how it's shaped are used to track you. And like me, I don't change the shape of my browser. I launch it, and that's persistent to my OS, and it's the same every time. And then my resolution, like I said, you know, I'm getting up there in age, so my fonts are probably a lot bigger than some of your fonts. And this is where it gets starts to piss me off. I'm dyslexic. I have been all my life. I kept it a secret until my daughter was diagnosed with dyslexia, and I decided to tell the world about my struggles. And one of the ways I cope in the world is there's a font called Open Dyslexic, and it makes it really much easier for me to read. So if when I work, I don't have Calibri or Arial. My default font is Open Dyslexic. Well, it turns out one of the ways we're being tracked is by your default font. And this is a really weird-looking font that no one would probably use unless you're dyslexic. So part of the attributes I'm being tracked by are I'm dyslexic, which kind of goes back to crossing to the uncool mark. Iframes. In the early days of the iframe, it was popular. You'd have your web page, and they'd put another web page in there, and you'd have multiple scroll bars, and it was a real pain. And it was like, for those of you who remember the TV, in TV, you could watch 2 football games at once. That was the original purpose of an iframe. And what iframes have devolved into is this is an iframe. And if you can see, the height of the iframe is 0 pixels, which means it's 0. The width is 0. So you've got an iframe that exists but doesn't exist. It can still run code in it, but it's 0 by 0, meaning it's not there. And the cascading style sheet says, don't display it, and it says hide it. So it's an iframe that's 0 wide by 0 high, that's not displayed and hidden, which means there's no human in the world that can read this. This is purely machine readable only. And this is kind of fun. It's an eye chart. But if you look at that, this one iframe that doesn't really exist except it exists, downloaded almost 18,000 lines of code, of JavaScript. So 18,000 lines of interpreted code were downloaded to the iframe that doesn't exist. Remote images are the same thing. This is DoubleClick. It's right there if you open up your Burpers app to see. There's a few things about this. So it's an image that's 0 high and 0 wide. So you've got a picture that has no width and no height. It's 0 dimensional. And the browser is told not to display it. And if you look there, it's got my OAuth token information. It's got my Google tracking ID. It has, and GDPR, for those of you in privacy, is a European privacy laws. And it says, Mike's not in Europe tracking. And the way it works is you log into a web page, and it displays an image that's 0 pixels wide, 0 pixels high, and not output by the browser. It's purely machine readable, but appended. If you, for those of you who do web coding, the key value pairs attached to the URL are just whole strings of data about me used to track me. And the last one is super cookies. And I added this back because super cookies are theoretically illegal and theoretically don't exist. But if you want to search Verizon super cookies, what happens is, your phone has, when I'm on my phone, it goes to my ISP, and my phone has a certificate for my ISP, and theoretically, no one can see that traffic. And what was happening, if you read it, is the ISPs were actually appending a unique tracker to every request you made, and then other companies could pay your ISP to know about you. Way, way uncool. They got in big trouble. Theoretically doesn't exist anymore, except that we keep reading about it. And when I look at this, for those of you who do the OWASP top 10, they're man-in-the-middling me, injecting a string into my request and passing it on. How is that not a man-in-the-middle ejection attack? That in the name of marketing. Then behavioral tracking. There's a lot of companies working this. It doesn't matter what I type for my password, but how fast I type the keys, where my fingers move. There's a lot of it. If you want to Google hotjar.com, they're a tracking company that monitors. People say, we don't have behavioral tracking yet, but we do. I mean, when I click that little box, I'm not a robot. It's not the fact I clicked the box that's tracked. It's how my mouse got there, how I clicked it. It's not clicking the box. And why you should care. So as I've been doing research for a long time, and I've got online personas that, as far as the internet is concerned, these people exist. They don't exist. My favorite story is I have a person who's a marketing manager for an ice cream company. The ice cream company doesn't exist. He doesn't exist. Nothing about it is real, except the ice cream company has a website. This guy has a website. He's got a LinkedIn. So as far as the tracking world is concerned, this is real. And my sales manager for my ice cream company, who doesn't exist, got an award for being marketing manager of the year in the ice cream industry, even though he doesn't exist. And you can't buy credibility like that when doing online research. But this is Beth, okay? She's a persona. And Beth, who doesn't exist, this image is actually one of the Microsoft stock images. She doesn't exist. She's also a social media manager. She's seeking help for family planning. She's a heavy user of social media. She cares about her privacy and has difficulty sleeping and having meaningful relationships since being stalked by a boyfriend. And that's important because we're going to talk about what so if you read into that, she's been traumatized, and when she's online, she behaves like she's been traumatized. So when she goes to get help for family planning, this is a major family planning website, 73% of the content was not owned by the website. It was outside content. So Beth may trust the primary site, the parent site. She probably doesn't trust the external sites. So just to go to the single landing page, there was 490 unique HTTP requests made to 56 different domains. Of those 56, 29 were considered tracking sites by the EFF, and 359 of those sites calls were made to sites that were not controlled by the parent site, which is just, we don't know if it's good or bad. It may be fine. The point is we just don't know. And because I'm a security researcher, of course, I track CVEs. Those upstream sites that feed into that DOM, one had a flat-out exploitable vulnerability. So even if everyone's trusted, you're trusting a site that can be RC'd. And this is just a list of the tracking sites that I found in that one. When Beth went to that one site, all of these are considered tracking sites by the EFF. And some may or may not be the EFF says they are. I've done a lot of work with some of these companies, and I can't say if they're good or bad. But as far as the EFF is concerned, they're doing some kind of tracking. Now, because Beth is on social media, when she went to that primary family planning site, and you can kind of Google your research, just the social media sites that were tracking her were, Alphabet, Meta, Microsoft, Snapchat, TikTok, and Twitter. And the funny thing about TikTok is everyone else, your tracking ID is a hash. You saw it on Google. My tracking ID is a 256-bit, character that Scrabble makes no sense. TikTok, love him or hate him, doesn't try to hide it. TikTok actually uses your user ID. Your user ID is right there being passed, And I do a lot of teaching at universities, and I showed some college students this, thinking they'd be appalled, and they didn't care. The younger generation just didn't care that TikTok knew everything they were doing. So the privacy thing seems to be generational. Back to Beth, and this is really important. There is a growing body of research that says people that are stalked in real life, particularly women, by people they trust, the sympathetic response, the traumatic response, is triggered by seeing things online. So if Beth were to go looking for Advil, Google the benefits of Advil for a migraine, and all of a sudden Facebook and Amazon started showing her ads for Advil, for Beth, that would actually be a traumatic trigger. So I put it, it's called the Trauma-Informed Computing Framework. So those of you involved in UI or tracking or marketing, please have a look at that, because we're actually traumatizing people with the tracking. Traditional cyber risk, there's vulnerable servers, there's malvertising, which is actually making a comeback, and there's content security, CSP, good gods, policies that are involved here. So I showed this before, but even if you trust a site, even if you have a contractual relationship with a site that says they're not going to do bad things, if that site is vulnerable and can be exploited, you now are inheriting their vulnerabilities. I mean, this is like any third-party risk management framework, but third-party risk management absolutely comes into play here. Malvertising. This was a really big thing 10 years ago, and I thought it was gone. And if you remember malvertising, some of the big, I can't compromise Google. Google, I may be a good hacker, but I can't compromise Google. But if I can compromise a smaller company that pays Google to feed ads into the Google network, every time that compromised ad is displayed, I now have an attack vector. And that was being used a lot 10 years ago, where they'd managed to sneak in malicious payloads into the Google's content, and they owned everybody. And that went away. I thought it was done. But if you read the news now, malvertising is a thing again. And when you talk about third-party ads, it goes back to, I may not be able to compromise a major website, but if I can compromise one of the 40 different tracking technologies that website allows to run, it's just like I can compromise other users. Contents, minimum necessary, if those of you who are programmers, minimum necessary means a process should only have as much permission and scope as it needs to run. Now, content security policies. For those of you who run web scanners, these are usually lower informational findings. I never really thought much about them until I was doing a project where I was trying to write a trying to compromise a cloud's web portal by iframing some stuff in, which I thought was going to be really easy. And a content security policy is almost like a little firewall running in the browser. I had no idea how cool these things were as a security control until I tried to own a site that was using it. And literally, it's like a firewall. There's a policy that runs, and it says, don't trust JavaScript, don't trust this, don't trust that. They're surprisingly complicated, but if you're involved in web security at all, I really would suggest you look into them because it's remarkably effective. And a proper CSP can block any naughty things marketing tries to force into your code. Just to recap, the cyber risk, we used to say you can't have good privacy without good security. I'm reversing that. It really appears you can't have good security if your privacy is bad. For tracking things to work, we have to weaken the DOM and we have to weaken the cookies. And the downstream or upstream risk, we really have a third-party risk management situation going on. How to protect your organization. And I pick on marketing a lot, but it's true. So, in a very generic life cycle, someone still want to do a project. You do a security impact assessment and a privacy impact assessment saying, yeah, it looks good. They do designs, you review the designs, everything looks good. You do your security testing, whatever that may be, your pen testing, your scanning, whatever you do that. You're ready to move to production, and marketing says, here's some Google snippets, throw these in. And that's not part of your privacy impact assessment. It wasn't part of your design. It wasn't part of your testing, but it's Google, so we all trust it. And then you move to production, and you forget it's there. Continuous monitoring doesn't look at it, and your analytics are long forgotten. And that's the life cycle of in my experience, that's the typical life cycle of how these get in there. So the way to protect your organization, during your design review, any code or any libraries that go in need to be part of your design. You can't add code to a project that's not part of the design. Privacy impact assessments, that should be, and then check your privacy policy for compliance. Then testing, and there's a lot of stuff from the EFF I'll show you. And post-implementation, for a lot of you have to do annual reviews. Double check it, make sure it's still part of your privacy policy, make sure things haven't changed. Manual testing, anytime I do any kind of security assessment, there's two plugins I use and recommend. One is Cookie Editor and one is Privacy Badger. Now, the cons of these are, when you let one of these things run in your browser, it can see a lot. It can probably see more than you want it to. So there's little toggles where you can turn them on and off. But the way that Cookie Editor works, or Cookie plugin works, it'll show you all the cookies, and you can see in this case that underscore FBP is Facebook pixel. And when you click on that, it actually shows you the value, the domain, and at the bottom, you can kind of see at the bottom where it says HTTP only session. None of those are checked. So if you're doing a security assessment, privacy assessment, you will actually say that cookie is weak. That in most cases, that cookie would not pass. If that cookie is used for any kind of session management or anything that's important, that cookie would not pass. The other plugin I use that I love is EFS Privacy Badger. That literally just shows you can toggle things on and off. In this case, I'm allowing Cloudflare because it doesn't work without Cloudflare. I'm blocking Facebook. I'm blocking some other things. So if you're doing an assessment, running the privacy badge in your browser, you click a button and it shows you these things, and you can export that, and you can just export it, put it straight in your report, share management. For those of you who are doing, there's someone's taking a picture. There you go. For those of you who have CI/CD pipelines, you can actually integrate this. A lot of you don't, but if you go to EFF as a GitHub with their yellow list, just make sure if anything on the yellow list is showing up in your code, you've got a tracker. And that may be okay, by the way. There's a lot of good reasons an organization uses trackers. I'm not saying don't use trackers. I'm saying be informed. I'd argue a lot of organizations are tracking that don't need to. Google Analytics, the most common tracker out there, if you look at the code snippets out there and the examples, they all don't anonymize your IP. So if you read Google's documentation, it'll say don't use this for anything sensitive without anonymizing the IP. So what I've done here for you is copy and paste. If you have Google Analytics, that stuff in green, it's one line of code that will anonymize your users. But if all the snippets and examples online don't have that. Google Tag Manager is their next big thing. It's one line of code. Copy and paste that, and you'll have anonymous users. So if you look at that, only 14% of the sites on the internet actually use it properly. 86% of the sites on the internet are not anonymizing IP, the IP addresses. It's one line of code. How to protect yourself. We saw the Brave browser is the most effective browser. If you click the Brave browser, it blocked everything. Unique fingerprint, unique everything. And that continues to be true. Yeah, my clever little backlinks aren't working. I had this all set up so it was nice and fancy. Okay. Oh, yes. Yeah, the question is, if I say Firefox is the best, why am I saying Brave is the most effective at blocking things? Brave gives you a unique fingerprint, which is important. But there are some sites that use fingerprinting for session management, meaning they track you by your fingerprint, and if you use Brave, they'll break. So you can default to Brave, but if a site's not working or something's not, and oftentimes it's really difficult to know why it's breaking, I switched to Firefox. So my default is Firefox. If I want to be super private, and we'll talk about VPNs in a minute. Brave is more private, but it's a poorer user experience. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah, you have to add some things. And I know it's for those of you who want to go to lunch now, I won't be offended. Feel free to leave. We're actually almost done. Privacy Badger. If you're using Privacy Badger, no matter what browser you're using, it'll compensate. Think of Privacy Badger as a compensating control. And my clever little backlinks are not working. I'm not sure why. Apps. Your browser was invented to have an abstraction layer between your OS and the internet. You never put anything on the internet without something in the middle. When you use an app, like a Facebook app or anything, that app has deep hooks into the OS. That app can do things your browser never could do. And companies keep pushing apps. Use your Facebook app, use your Google app, use this app. All of those have, if you want to be private on your iPhones or your iPads, use your browser, not the apps. Now, VPNs, there's two VPNs I use. I don't work for either one of them. NordVPN is a commercial closed source VPN, and Orchid is an open source. If you go to orchid.com, it's an open source type of VPN. It's a specialized peer-to-peer. But without a VPN, on my home Wi-Fi, my provider knows everything, the web page and everything. Well, when I'm on my wireless, same thing. When I use Nord, if you see that, they know I use Nord. And if I'm using Orchid, they know I use Orchid. Now, we trust, there's a certain level of trust in both. With Nord, we have to trust they're not middling us. There's a lot, if you read the news or Google it, a lot of VPN service providers were middling and selling data. Nord, I use Nord because I trust Nord. I've never seen their source code. Never audited them, but I like them. Orchid is open source. You can go to their GitHub and see their code. And I use both of them interchangeably. Let's see, I apologize for this. And we're almost done here. Opt out. You can opt out of tracking, and I've done this. I've given you URLs you can go to. Just go to these URLs and follow the thing for opting out. Oh, I'm sorry. There you go. Still going? Okay. Just in closing, there's some further reading here, and any image I use here, I believe I have the right to. I make my living protecting intellectual property, so I always like to make sure people know that. Feel free to follow me. I'm Mike Landeck on LinkedIn. You can contact me for slides or questions. Always love talking about anything to do with hacking or privacy. Any questions? Oh, how does VPN help? So, that's true. It helps partially. You know, I'll give you an example. I flew in last night from Sacramento, and I stayed at a hotel with a Wi-Fi. By using a VPN, I'm confident that there's nothing on that Wi-Fi that's intercepting me, and I'm confident there's no super cookies, and I'm confident that my IP is being masked. So it's not complete protection at all. It's just one layer. VPNs by itself, without any other security, aren't that helpful. You know, that's true for privacy or security. It's all about being layered, but a VPN is a very important layer. Hi.
Are there any specific VPN programs that you would recommend over others?
I'm not a VPN expert. I really like Orchid because it's on GitHub. I can see it. I know who wrote it. I know they care. And then I like Nord, maybe Blind Trust, but I figure they're too big. They're too big to do something stupid. You know, my daughter was using one of those free ones. I'm not sure why in college. Good for her. She was in her dorm. A lot of hackers in her dorm. She downloaded a VPN she'd never heard of. Bad news was it wasn't a trustworthy VPN. Nord is big enough. I trust it. I'm not paid by them. I don't know them. I've never audited them. The fact they're so big feels like there's a level of trust there. Okay. Yes, sir.
Your thoughts on the effectiveness of network-level blocking, like Pi-hole or PF blocker?
Oh, yeah. So there's like Pi-hole. There's things you can do that will basically DNS sync any request to trackers. I like them, but the problem with them is similar to the problem with Brave, in that some things will break. Not everything. Using the privacy badger at the browser level versus network level, I have easier control. You can always log into Pi-hole and change things, but for me, toggling in the browser is just easier. But they're just as effective. And what they do is they work by syncing. So your browser will make a request to tracking.com, and before it leaves your network, it goes into dev null. Yes.
For making those like soft open accounts or catfishing accounts, do you have to use any like clean devices, or is there any chance of like contaminating that with your own identity?
Oh, I use a lot. I use a lot of VMs. I use a lot. Beth has her own VM. Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry, of course. Yes, sir.
Have you done any research regarding voice tracking?
Oh, any voice tracking? I have not. You know, this voice tracking now with and it's a fascinating field, but it's a little over my head. Yes, sir.
So Mike, I'm curious, if we switch to a browser like Brave, does that mean that we don't need a shoddy ad blocker anymore?
Good question. So if you go to Brave, do you need an ad blocker? The answer is I don't know. My gut is I like defense in depth, so I'd run both, but that's just my gut. But the answer is no, because Brave would still allow script to run. It would give you a unique fingerprint. It would block a lot, but it won't block everything. You know, there's some tracking cookies. You saw this stuff from I think it was, there's some CDNs that are considered trackers that Brave might block that you just need. You know, there's some websites that just won't work without it. So I do like having control. Yes, sir, in the back. The question is there a difference between anonymous proxy and VPN? For our purposes, no. You know, there's obviously a difference, you know, from a network layer, security layer there is, but for our purposes and privacy, I don't think there would be. In fact, yeah, part of Nord acts like an anonymous proxy. Any more questions? Yes, sir.
In a company environment, what would you suggest is the best like enterprise tool for a company to help maintain the exposure of third-party companies?
Thank you. And the question is, how do you roll this out in enterprise? EFF, if you go to EFF, they actually have an enterprise, they have actually a privacy badger that's enterprise manageable. So they actually have an enterprise console for you to roll it out. So I'd go to EFF Privacy Badger and look at their enterprise tools. Because it's hard, because I don't have admin control over my work laptop. So I'm stuck. Yep, good question. Anyone else? Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.